Call this meeting of the South Bedford Board of Education together at the Jan Jacobs Building on Monday, January 13th, 2020. And they have told me that I have to put 2020 on all my documents because you can't just put 20.
Sure can.
So, anyway, and the reason for that is anybody can write in any number after it. So, everybody be forewarned. Anyway, moving on. We also.
Order at 6:38.
6:38. Thank you, Mr. Baker. Please stand for the pledge of allegiance. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Will the secretary please call it?
Sure. Nicole Kangas.
Present.
Steve Baker, President. Laurie Hicks.
Present.
Shirley Tolliver.
Present.
Cheryl Flesher.
Present.
Tom Dowdy. And birthday girl, Misha Early.
Did you get Nicole?
She was first.
Oh, okay. That's that one. Okay, next item on the agenda is approval of the agenda. Are there any additions or changes to the agenda? There being none, the agenda stands as written. Next item on the agenda is Board of Education officers. And I will ask for nominations for president. Mrs. Tolliver? Thank you. Are there any other nominations? There being none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, motion carries. Oh, I forgot to ask for support. Do we have support?
Support.
Next office is the vice president. Are there any nominations for vice president?
Madam President,
Mrs.
I'd
Flusher?
like to nominate Shirley Tolliver, please.
Is there support? Support. Mrs. Kangas? Are there any other nominations? There being none, all in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed? Motion carries. Next position is the secretary. Are there any nominations for secretary?
Madam President,
Ms.
I'd
Flusher?
like to nominate Steve Baker.
Is there support?
Support.
And do we have any other nominations? There being none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion carries. Nominations for treasurer.
Madam President,
Mr. Baker,
I nominate Cheryl.
is there support? Support. By Mrs. Tolliver. Any other nominations? There being none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Madam President, you didn't ask one of us if we would accept the nomination. It needs to be reflected in the minutes. I just want to make sure we do this kosher.
That choo-choo train is
I
going.
accept.
Mrs. Flusher?
Yeah.
I accept. Mr. Baker?
Not a chance in the world. I did.
Okay. All right. One of these years I'll get it right.
We were on such a roll, I didn't want dare interrupt.
Not that I'm in a hurry to get this over with, but. Okay, next item on the agenda is the Plus Delta. No, recognition of people programs. Mr. Bob.
Yes, Madam President, I have two this evening. Vandenberg students will be performing in a concert tomorrow evening, Tuesday, January 14th at 6:30 p.m. in the Thurston High School Auditorium. Performances will include musical games, songs, movement, dances, as well as showcase music. And that's tomorrow evening at Thurston High School
At what time?
at 6:30 p.m. with the students from Vandenberg. And then secondly, Fisher Elementary School is proud to recognize its newest robotics team. At the end of the calendar year, the Fisher Flying Eagles team, made up of 4th and 5th graders, took 11th place out of 25 teams for the first LEGO League competition. Fisher wishes to thank coordinators Fisher parent Cordelia Blake and her mother, a Fisher grandparent, for their leadership of the students with this competition. Along with the help of outside coaching and other parents' technological skills, the students had a successful first competition. So congratulations to
Absolutely, great.
Fisher Robotics team. And I have some pictures to accompany the Fisher event, and so I'm going to pass that around for people to see some of the pictures of the highlights from the Fisher competition.
Is Fisher the only school that has robotics, or do the other elementary?
Elementary.
Are the only one?
It might be Pierce Middle School.
Pierce Middle School has one.
Right, no, I was talking about elementary though. That's cool. They were starting to move down that far.
Absolutely. We're excited.
Yeah,
Excited to have a feeder system for robotics.
yeah.
I love their hats.
Yeah. The Fisher Flying Eagles.
Okay, then, the next item on the agenda is, do we have any other recognitions or communications for board superintendent?
I have 2 communications,
Okay.
but that's it for recognition of people and programs.
Okay.
But the additional 2 communications this evening is just a friendly reminder to the board that a week from today is Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Day. And so sticking with tradition, we are having the Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. breakfast, and we'll be hosting this year. And it's our tradition of honoring the legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And so, just want to remind the board that all of you are certainly welcome to participate and attend. It's a week from today. It is at 7 o'clock in the morning. It's the annual prayer breakfast. We'll have a keynote speaker, as well as musical entertainment by both the Thurston as well as Redford Union choirs. And in addition to the choirs from Thurston and Redford Union, we will also have a special performance by the America's Got Talent runner-up, which is the Detroit Youth Choir. And so they also will be performing in addition to the Thurston Choir as well as the Redford Union choirs. And then following the performance and the keynote speaker in the auditorium, we will enjoy breakfast together with some activities in the new cafeteria over at Thurston. So it starts bright and early, actually before it's bright out. It starts at 7 a.m. And so if you are interested in attending, I would remind you and encourage you to get in touch with Jan so that she can RSVP to make sure that we have enough seats for everybody.
I would like to attend, keeping in mind that's my day off. I'm no sleeping yet. It's gonna be a get up early. So, okay. I
We
plan on
would love
attending.
to have anybody who's able to attend.
I would like to attend also, and I think we have to RSVP by the 15th.
Yes, thank you for mentioning that. So if you haven't RSVP'd yet to Jan, if you could let her know tomorrow.
I'll take that RSVP now.
Thank you.
That'd be great.
I was just gonna ask you that.
Madam President,
Mrs.
I
Tyler?
attended Vandenberg's Christmas celebration, and they sung, and it was fantastic. I really enjoyed it.
And then also, Madam President, as you notice with your treats this evening for the board, you'll notice that there's some special chocolates as well as the fruit. And you also have a new chair to recognize Board Appreciation Month. And so I know that we mention this periodically throughout the year, but especially this evening, that we cannot thank each and every single one of you enough for the work that you do and the time that you dedicate to our community. There are challenging roles in which all of you serve, and you do great work for our school district and have for a really long time. And so to commemorate your dedication for School Board Appreciation Month, please enjoy tonight's treats inclusive of your chairs. The chairs are new chairs, so I know we're talking about next generation spaces and stuff, so you'll notice they're super lightweight. And so if you are traveling or walking, they're much lighter to carry. But with that, they're not quite as tall. But the cup holder still holds a water bottle or a can of soda or seltzer water, whatever your beverage of choice is. But you'll notice that they are considerably lighter than the chairs from quite some time ago. However, if you prefer a taller chair, please let Jan know. We'll be glad to order you a taller chair if you prefer. You'll also notice that the district logo is on the back of the chair, so that when you're at the fireworks or at a sporting event,
They'll know who we are.
you will have your district swag.
It's all right.
So they will know who we are. So thank you. That's all I have, Madam
I
President.
still travel with my towel.
Yes, and those are great as well.
Yes, those are nice, yes.
Okay, next item on the agenda is comments from the audience. Mr. Baker, do we have any comments?
We have none, Madam President.
Next item on the agenda is Plus Delta Plan for Improvement. Christine?
We had no deltas at the last meeting. A few pluses, but no deltas. That's what we said.
I like that. Next item on the agenda is the consent agenda. Do I have a member of the board willing to move the consent agenda?
Madam President, I'd like to move the adoption of the following resolution, please.
Mrs. Flusher? Thank you, Mrs. Tolliver. That was going to be my next question. Are there any questions, comments, concerns regarding the consent agenda resolution? There being none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, motion carries. Next item on the agenda is the secondary summer school report. And Mr. Bott, I don't know if you're turning it right over?
I will do that momentarily, but just on the last agenda item there, I do want to give a special thanks to Kathy Lloyd Langley, the Director of Finance. I know that we have it on the agenda this evening, but just a special thanks to Kathy and her recognition to Adams. She donated $250 to Adams, and so for those of you that don't know, Kathy is an alumni, not only of Thurston, but also of Adams. And Michelle Hubbard wrote a very kind letter thanking Kathy for her donation, but also on behalf of the school district as well as certainly the school board. Kathy, your dedication clearly just continues to extend beyond the work that you do, but also with your monetary donation. So thank you. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Mr. Brader and Mr. Ramon Watkins and Mr. Josh Crawford for our summer school. Our khaki club. Yeah, no problem.
All right, well, thanks for letting us come in and tell you about the program that we put together this past summer. Sorry it took us this long to find a date where both of us could actually be here. I think we started with Jan in like October trying to figure out when to come in. So we just wanted to go over kind of what we did and a couple changes we made and some thoughts for the future this coming summers, and some of the big changes included a really cool field trip that Josh put together, so we want to have him show you some stuff and talk about that as well. I think
All right, so we're just going to tell you a little bit about the day-to-day operations. It was set up in 2 tracks, 7th and 8th grade, and then kids going into 7th and 8th grade and kids going into 9th grade. We covered the core courses, science, social studies, science, math, and English. But our goal is, it kind of started with Jason, the goal of our summer school program and our task to teacher was to make it seem, make sure the kids are learning, but make it seem as different from everyday school as we can make it be. Be a totally different learning experience that was as far from them coming in and sitting down and getting the PowerPoint presentation. I think most of this is really about, and in addition to that, give the kids a real sense of their part of the Retford community. So that was kind of our goal of the whole through, make it different from what school has already been, as teachers to be creative, and at the same time make them part of our learning program. And that included, of course, the whole goal of everything was keep kids learning throughout the summer and to actually improve student skills. And our goal, we did have a pre and post test to make sense of that. But our teachers kind of did the most of the work, because our task, these are all our teachers, and they all did a great job of coming up with creative, engaging assignments. We had, Josh is going to go over the one he got. Our guy who did social studies did a great presentation on social studies and history of Detroit through Motown sound. So they all came up with a creative way of trying to make sure kids were engaged and still learning something, but as far away from an everyday curriculum they had. And teachers really appreciated that. They liked the fact that they didn't have the restraint of that standardized testing that they had to worry about. They just had to make sure they was learning and make sure they were engaged, and that allowed them to become creative as they could. I think the rest was kind of goes through it.
Yeah, it's hard to find teachers that are willing to work in the summer on stuff that they come up with all themselves. I mean, it's so hard to do the job during the year to then sign up to take a month or more out of your summer and be like, I'm going to create totally new curriculum that actually has nothing to do with what I'm doing in my regular classroom. It's really refreshing to see, that we have that many staff members here that want to do this, and the people who didn't participate this past summer, who have in the past, were actually sad that they didn't do it, and asked to make sure that we come back to them and ask them to see if they're up for it for the next summer. And I think this group this year, including what Josh is going to talk about, I mean, they really embraced, like Ramona's saying, that this idea of non-traditional, non-textbook PowerPoint classroom style learning, and the kids echoed it. I think you'll see some of the results and some of their responses to some survey stuff. They really, and this is, I think I said this last year when we did this presentation, as a teacher, it makes me think a lot about what I do to see how they respond to this, and sometimes I wonder why we don't, with so many restrictions on us, I feel like we could do more if we could do more of this. I guess is what I'm trying to say.
The teachers love the freedom of summer. Teachers love the freedom of summer school. All I get to go in and be as creative as I can. I'm doing a pre and post test to make sure they do it. But other than that, I don't have any restraints such as standardized testing or quarterlies. There are all those restraints that we have throughout the year. So the teachers really enjoy it.
And that's the hardest job for us, really. It has nothing to do with the kids. Is to support the creativity of the staff that we have. Trying to take these big ideas and make them fit in 50 minutes or into the 4 weeks or something like that, or pare it down in terms of some things are expensive and you just can't get it done. But to think about how we can tweak it and make it happen for the kids, that's refreshing to have to. For that to be the biggest problem you have to deal with is really exciting.
And that's kind of, you come up with it and we'll see if we can make it happen. I think Josh is a perfect example. Come up with it. We had always expenses going back and in. She was great with getting teachers reimbursed. They would go out and buy stuff that would get them reimbursed. So these next few are just a few of the things we did, and we'll go into Josh's. That's Yeah.
And you know, at the beginning of the summer, we have these ideas and staff has some ideas, but a lot of the best project-y things like this come to the staff at the end of the day before the next day. They're like, oh, this is what we really should be doing. Then they're trying to get with
Yeah.
us like, oh, I know that I said I was going to do this other thing, but how can we make this work? And it's really exciting.
It's the cookie class. So they learn to cook recipes.
Tricking them into doing math.
Yeah.
Cookies make it easier, for sure.
That was kind of our end of the year celebration, kind of that community park. So at the end, our last day, that was in the courtyard at the high school, we had some music. So the kitchen, we had pizza. Staff was serving pizza to the kids. Again, the whole goal of the whole thing, in addition to learning, we wanted to make sure they were felt like coming to summer school was actually being part of a whole community.
And when you see the attendance, you'll see that the final week where we did a lot of this kind of stuff, the attendance was the highest by far of the 4 weeks.
Yeah.
And that's all Mr. Simmons' equipment, right? Mr. Simmons brought all that stuff in.
Yeah, teacher brought all that stuff in.
Yeah, he incorporates this into talking about jobs and part of the life skills class, and he works also as a DJ for events and stuff like that. So he brings it in, he talks to kids how it works, give an example, and then he asks for volunteers. So you can see this kid is up there running the mic there. After he is the same kid here at the top here, kind of watching and helping. And you know, this is taking full advantage of all the space that we have out on the track, doing science by doing long jumps, trying to make kids do stuff and learn from the stuff that they're doing. All right, that brings us to Josh's.
All right, Josh Crawford. I'll talk a little bit about where I was as far as my headspace coming back. Because last school year I was not here teaching. I got approved by a leave of absence to go back my master's degree in environmental education. So as soon as I graduated from that master's program in May, I mean, all I was thinking about is what can I do when I get back? And that's why I was so excited to participate with the summer learning programs, because I had an opportunity to kind of show some of my growth in that area. Yeah, and I guess one of the first ways I thought that I could do this was working with get them out on the water. You know, being in an urban environment and having the lack of vegetation or it being so sparse, I really wanted to give students an opportunity to explore areas that are denser with that biodiversity. And prior to summer school starting, you know, I got back to Michigan in May. I was down in Indiana, and my first 4 years of working at Pierce, I actually in the summertime I'd work at a canoe rental, just to kind of like keep busy. You know, I wasn't making good money, but you know, I got to talk to people as I drove a van around, got to drag some canoes, and all the meanwhile, I'm noticing these large camp groups coming through, and they're sending 50 canoes up on the water. I said, man, we can do that, right? So I'm just kind of telling Ramon over here, and Ramon is such a catalyst. You know, I just say things sometimes, and he's like, all right, let's do it. And then the next day he's like, hey, so man, I'm thinking about this, and you know, what do we got to do? You know, so he's really just getting after me. I'm like, okay, this is happening. You know, Ramon is behind me, it's happening. So I mean, that brought a lot of life to me. You know, I started talking with, we worked with Heavener Canoe Rental, which is up in Milford, and you know, like I said, I worked in that Heavener family during the summers, and I knew that we could make it happen for our students. So, you know, we talked a little bit about pricing, and, you know, they went down on their prices a little bit. I told them about our program. They're like, yeah, let's get those kids out here.
You guys came with some money at the end to make it happen. The board
It was awesome.
came up with some money at the end.
Yeah. So, I I had just like a water sleeve for my phone, and I took some video while we're out there, and I just put a real quick slideshow together. We'll probably, it's like 7 minutes long, so we'll probably get to maybe halfway through, and then I'll talk a little bit more about a survey that we gave kids at the end of this trip, so we can talk about how they reflected on that experience.
We have minimal communications from the group this month as our buildings are extremely busy coming back from Christmas break, which we all very much enjoyed. From the Student Services Center, the Shear building, things continue to be busy in the Student Services office with special education paperwork. I'm beginning the process of moving students in the state assessment site from M-Step to My Access and placing that initial order. I'm also continually working on different aspects of the ASD program and budget. We are currently working on the submission of next year's budget for this program. From Pierce Middle School, in the Media Center, Rosanna has been busy recently helping out on the tech side with the NWEA testing. We are preparing for new 5th grade students that visit on February 7th. Pierce bags will be given to each 5th grader. The clerical staff orders the bags, the supplies that go in the bags, and fills them. It is an exciting day for the 5th graders, and we look forward to it every year. NWEA testing took place last week, the 6th through the 10th of January, which is always a challenge if we are short on substitutes and for students who need early dismissals. Not interrupting classroom time is a high priority every day. Rosanna has been busy helping with that side. We implemented a mandatory ID for staff and students this year for security reasons and to be in alignment with Thurston. It is a good thing, but with most good things it requires work. The clerical staff is involved with fines for reprints, reprinting IDs, and temporary IDs. Students are getting better at remembering to wear them as there are consequences for not complying. In general, from the group, we will be sad to lose a few of our members to retirements this year and the challenges that those losses will provide. It's always hard when we lose those that have provided so many years of experience and dedication, but we are hopeful to add new members that are just as wonderful and dedicated as those that will be moving on to the next phase of their lives. Names will be provided at a later date. Thank you.
Thank you. And do we have anybody from the SRO? None? On to the next item. Okay, school board assignments. And the first assignment is the secretary report on the selection of a person responsible for posting public meetings. Mr. Baker.
We have a wonderful staff here in Suffolk, your school district included in that. Our dear friend Jan, and we continue to be very good.
Yep. And you just got voluntold.
I guess I accept.
You did a lot of that at work, so. Okay, the president will report on the following annual report was his assignments. Last year on our committee to review the process for the board's annual performance evaluation was Mr. Baker, Mrs. Hicks, and Mrs. Early. Is there anyone else that wants to be on that committee? Okay, in that case, does Mr. Baker, Mrs. Early, and Mrs. Hicks accept continuing as that committee? Okay. Next one is the committee to review updates for the Board of Education Policy Manual. We have Mrs. Flesher, Mrs. Hicks, and Mrs. Tolliver. Is there anyone else that wants to be on that committee? Okay. Does Mrs. Flesher, Mrs. Hicks, and Mrs. Tolliver want to continue? Yes. Okay. Committee to review the Board of Education Orientation Operations Manual. We had Flesher, Hicks, and Tolliver. Is there anyone who wants to be on that committee? Next is Mrs. Tolliver, Mrs. Flusher, Mrs. Hicks willing to continue?
Yes.
Yes. Representative member of the South Redford Foundation, SRF, for 2019 is was Mrs. Tolliver. Is there anyone who wants to be on that committee? Hi. Thank you, Mrs. Tolliver. The committee to review the format of the superintendent's evaluation. That was Mr. Baker, Hicks, and Early. Is there anyone who wants to be on that committee? I'm noticing kind of a pattern here, gang. Okay. Does Mr. Baker, Hicks, and Early agree to be on that committee?
Yes.
Committee to orient new board members, and that's the Board of the Whole during workshop. I don't think we had any new members this year, so it's not an election year. Liaison to MASB Legislative Relations Network and NSB Federal Relations Network. We had Mrs. Hicks, Mrs. Tolliver, and Mrs. Flusher. Is there anyone that wants to be on that committee? And does Mrs. Flusher, Tolliver, and Hicks agree to continue?
Yes.
Yes. Representatives to serve on the Sex Education Advisory Board. We had Mrs. Tolliver. Is there anyone that wants to be on that committee? Mrs. Tolliver, do you continue? Representative to serve on the Wellness Committee. We had Ms. Kangas. Is there anyone that wants that committee? Mrs. Kangas, do you agree to continue on it? I agree. Thank you. The representative of the Wayne County Association of School Boards. Hicks was appointed to the Wayne County by resolution of Wayne County's Association of the School Boards. And because they do that appointment, it's a still standing where others are still appointed there.
What does that term, what's the terminus for that term?
I think it's 6 years.
Oh,
Yeah. Unless I go off our board, then it would decide.
right.
Committee to review and recommend the superintendent's compensation package in 2019. It was Mr. Baker, Hicks, and Kangas. Is there anyone who wants to be on that committee? Mrs. Early. Okay. Mr. Baker, Mr. Kangas, or myself, are one of you willing to step down? Because I will step off that one.
Oh, no.
No, I'm willing to step off that one.
Reason,
Yeah. The last time we did it, it was a 5 year, so we just kind of have to review it and keep it.
right, but I think part of the rationale is that if you have 4 people, then it becomes a.
Right.
Okay.
Okay.
Not tenure,
Well,
but, what's the word?
Quorum.
Quorum issue.
Yeah.
And so then, that's why we limited it to the 3.
Okay, so it will be Mr. Baker, Ms. Kangas, and Ms. Early. Okay? All right. Those are our appointments. Okay, next item on the agenda. Are comments from the audience?
There was none, Madam President.
Next item on the agenda is the Plus Delta and Board Communications. And I believe Christine is taking that one.
Yes. So for tonight's meeting, we will have our Plus Delta. What pluses come to mind? What processes are what helped us have an effective meeting this evening?
I have a plus. A few years ago, we combined these 2 meetings. There was a special meeting for the organizational aspects,
Okay.
and then our regular meeting.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm glad that we abandoned that. It was just a needless duplication. So I continue to believe we did the right thing.
So combining the organizational meeting with the regular board meeting.
Yes.
Are there other pluses? Things that went well?
Yes. Our summer school program was just fantastic the way they did it. And as I said, we'd like to thank them for their dedication and commitment to our district.
Anything else?
Any deltas?
We're on a roll.
Okay.
I have another. Jason did a
Okay.
great job.
Yes.
Yeah.
He certainly did. He filled Mr. Golden's
Yes.
very well.
Yes.
Mr. Who?
And too for the extra special treats.
Yes, absolutely, because we know where that came from.
Yes.
Okay, I also have one other communication, the NSBA advocacy. Did you get your, because I know you're planning on attending, did you get yours into Wayne County for
Yes.
reimbursement?
Jan took care of that for me.
Very good. Are you going also, Nicole, or no? No. Okay, so we'll look forward to your report back. Okay. Next item on the agenda is our sticking points. And I believe Mr. Bob is taking it.
Yes. Thank you, President Hicks. Well, Happy New Year again to everyone. We are going to transition to our book study. I am passing out some reference guides for you that will come in handy for one of our activities this evening when we assemble into groups. And so you will notice that in an effort to save some trees, they are double-sided. But go ahead and take a glance at those and familiarize yourself with those while I pass out a few more things for our reference this evening. And so those 4 items are in relation to the 4 chapters of this evening's book study. And so I open up with Happy New Year, not only because it's the first time that we are all coming together in the new year, but I also open up with Happy New Year because I hope that during your holiday celebrations, it was an opportunity to observe and then interact with various generations. And I know that all of you like to stretch your learning. And so I look forward to hearing some anecdotal stories from each of you. I know that prior to the holidays we had some good laughs, but hopefully you had some opportunities during your holiday celebrations to interact and observe with how various generations celebrated over the holidays and how that might actually connect to our book study. And so we're going to actually dive into that a little bit. But so that was one thing that I just wanted to mention as a jumping off point. So think back to some of the holiday experiences that you had and just kind of make a mental note of which generations were represented during those holiday celebrations and what you may have observed or perhaps an interaction that you had with somebody over the holidays from a different generation and how that might incorporate with what we've been talking about with our book study. So the other handouts that you have are also double-sided. And so we're going to actually come back to page 108, but you'll notice some things in there. I realize that it may have been some time since we've interacted with the book because of the holidays. But really, it starts off and it talks about sticking points that bring workplaces and work environments and families together, or sometimes might pull them apart. And so we spent the first several book studies examining the different generations. And so we talked about the traditionalists and the baby boomers, and we talked about Gen Xers, and then we talked about millennials. And so on page 108, you can kind of see that I drew a bracket there for us this evening, that we're going to take a look at some of these sticking points at times when sometimes generations start to, in the words of the book, become sticking points. So we're going to circle back to that. But then if you flip it over onto the back, I just want to highlight the first chapter. If you notice that quick little data graph that they have there, really the first part of our book study tonight talks about communication. And that's the slide that I have up here for us to just kind of familiarize ourselves and get our brains re-engaged with the book since the break. And so various generations communicate differently. So it's not only what you communicate, but how you communicate and when you communicate. And so you'll notice the first thing that I handed out, those little small little tickets, right? So you'll notice the same graphic that we have up on our Clever Touch screen here. This is going to come in handy for our upcoming activity. So you'll notice it's the same image that we have there. So now you have it in your possession as well. But I just want to highlight, I don't want to read it to you, but it really talks about how the different generations communicate, when they communicate, why they communicate, how they prefer to communicate. But I just want to remind us of the previous work that we've done, where think about, God bless you, think about the era, because we talked about the why. And so let's just do a quick little refresher on communication. So if you're a traditionalist, one of the main modes of mass media or mass communication would have been which device? Raise your hand if you remember.
Radio.
The radio, right? So, and if you were a baby boomer, what would have been the new mass media that you would have received information? The television, right? And so, and with Gen Xers, there was something new that was added that we looked at that was for the first time coming into households, and we watched a short little video clip on it the last time. What was added to television or added to broadcasting? MTV, right? So cable networks get added. So it's not just ABC, NBC, CBS, right? Where we had conversation that the networks used to sign off at the end of the night. Well, now with cable television, we had hundreds of channels that were added, and they never turned off, right?
And you still can't find anything you want.
And sometimes
Especially not at 3 o'clock in the morning.
That's for sure.
And then we fast forward, and then we spoke about and took a look at the millennials, right? And so what was the new means of communication or the communication device that was added in terms of how people were sending or receiving their message was through? It was through text messages, social media, the internet, right? Wi-Fi connections. So keep that in mind, because we talked a lot about the why. So we're going to have to draw on all those previous experiences that we've had collectively in our book studies for our work tonight. And so that little data chart there on the back, so it is page 112 there. You can see how those communications, they just give some examples. But notice how they took off. The one that I really like to focus on is that third one down. You know, if you take a look at the Palm Pilot, right? And it talks about months. And then if you look over to the right-hand side, it talks about the iPhone. And it also talks about how many hours, right? So just how quickly it starts to multiply. So communication, how we choose to communicate, when, what, and what's our mode of preferred communication. Mr. Baker.
Just anecdotally, I remember it was 1978, and we got a new CPM computer, and we thought we were all that in a bag of chips. And I remember my dad saying, "We'll never need to buy another computer."
And now someone's trying to sell you a new one every 18 months.
Yeah.
If not sooner.
It was like when I went from the the old bag phones,
Oh,
Yes.
to one that you can carry in your pocket. And then I went to the iPhone, and I found myself having to go into my kids and say, what do I do with this?
Yeah.
Sure.
You know, so.
Sure. And those are all important things to think about for our work tonight. And so draw on all those experiences. So communication. And then if you transition on to the next page or the next chapter, it transitions to talking about how people make decisions in the decision-making process. And so, again, the author lists this as a place where we can either come apart or we can pull apart, because if we don't think about why people choose to make decisions the way that they do, or what experiences they grew up with, right? And so we talked about those things with the traditionalists. We talked about those ghost stories. And so let's just recap what some of those ghost stories were that we talked about. For traditionalists, what were a couple of the ghost stories that formulated who they are as a generation when we talk about traditionalists? We've already mentioned the radio, that was a big one.
Stock market crash.
We talked about stock market crash. We talked about the world wars, right? There was another one we talked about, the Depression, right? We talked about how our ancestors sometimes save everything and why they save everything. So those are their ghost stories. Okay, so then let's transition to the baby boomers. What were some of the ghost stories that we spoke about with the baby boomers in terms of how that might play into their decision-making process? What were some of the global or United States events that shaped their thinking? Vietnam was a big one that we talked about.
There was
Civil rights.
a war.
We talked about the civil rights movement,
Another war.
another war, right?
World
We talked
War
about
II.
talked about Korea War after World War II, right? There was another one that started to formulate the mistrust in
Watergate.
government, right? We talked about Watergate, right? Whereas with the traditionalists, they saw that large government intervention could bring them through the Depression, could bring them through World War II, right? Could defeat fascism in Europe. And then all of a sudden, some of that trust starts to erode because of Watergate. So then let's fast forward. We talked about Gen Xers. What were some of the ghost stories with Gen Xers? We already talked about MTV. Other ghost stories from Gen Xers that would shape their decision making?
Is 9/11 in there? Or is that later?
That's going to be for millennials,
That's in the-
but that's coming up.
How did you phrase that peace, love?
Oh, I said unicorns and lollipops.
There you go.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, everything was positive.
Yeah.
You know, it's
Yeah.
kind of like Woodstock and, you know,
Mm-hmm.
Tiny Tim tiptoed through the tulips, and that's what the Jeanette, yeah,
Love, make no war.
no war.
And what, speaking of which, that was a very peaceful time. So, nice memory, right? Because there was no world war taking place during the influential time for the Gen Xers. But we did talk about one particular thing. In fact, we looked at an image of it and something that's being knocked down.
The Berlin Wall.
The Berlin Wall comes down, right? So there was the Cold War, but it was without a whole lot of military conflict, right? So it was a relatively peaceful time. And then we talked about the millennials, certainly with 9/11. Were there other ghost stories from the millennials that we wanted to talk about?
Oh, does it
Well,
count?
Desert Storm.
So we had Desert Storm kind of with the Xers and millennials a little bit, depending on the ages. That's a good one. But then you also talked about, you know, to mention
War on
what
Terror is what it was.
the War on
Yeah.
Terror, right?
Yeah.
And then thinking about with Gen Xers that they're the first ones that really have access to computers, and then with millennials, it's now in their handheld devices, and certainly social media. But that
They talk to it.
they talk to it and it talks back to you.
Yeah.
So be thinking about how that plays into the decision-making process. If you flip over your half sheet there, you have this very image there in front of you. This ticket will come in handy momentarily. And then if we fast forward to the next chapter, this one really speaks for itself. You also have this on a half sheet of paper also. And it talks about the dress code, right? So this one kind of goes without saying. There has not been a whole lot of talk of dress code up until this moment in the book. And particularly, there's a large focus on flip-flops. And so we'll see how that plays into the workplace. And different people have different thoughts about them. So although we might need some new flip-flops to accompany our chairs that we got this evening with the district logo on our sandals, perhaps we could ask Jan if she might be able to help us out. We need matching flip-flops for our chairs.
And a sun hat
And
to
possibly.
protect our skin.
It's true.
I need a big flop.
Yeah, when we're sitting in our chair.
And then our last chapter that we're going to take a look at today is how people of different generations prefer to send and receive feedback. And the book also mentions that this is a sticking point where we can either come together or pull apart. So those are the handouts that you have in front of you. You have front and back of the images that will come into play. And then you also have, just as in our past times together, you also have your reference guides so that you can reference on each of those pages. You have the little cheat sheet, if you will, or the fact guide where it shows, the communication. You have a page of communication. And it walks through each of the 4 different generations. And then you also have your FAQ guide about dress code, right? And what traditionalists or baby boomers or Gen Xers or millennials may be thinking or wearing, and how that might play into performance. And then also you have the feedback guide as well. And again, you kind of have a quick reference guide for feedback for each of the 4 generations. So that kind of gets our brains flowing again. And at this time, we're going to go ahead and transition into our activity. And I don't know if Michelle and Jan, if you would like to participate, you can, but you certainly don't have to. So think about it. But we'll go ahead and we'll divide the table in half. And so we'll have Lori, Steve, Nicole, and Christine, and then we'll have Shirley, Cheryl, and Misha. And then I don't know if the 2 of you would like to participate or not.
Come on, come and join us.
Yeah, I would.
It's fun.
You go that way, I'll go that way.
Okay, we'll divide it.
All right, so we'll have Michelle join Misha's team, and then Jan will have you join Nicole's team.
Okay, that's fine.
And so, if you would go back to the front handout, page 108, here is our task for this evening, now that we are armed with this information. So feel free to pull up a chair. There's a chair over there, Michelle. Thanks for joining us. And so, for Lori's group, they're going to work, and Nicole's group, they're going to work on the first 4 bullet points. So they're going to work on the first 4 bullet points. And then for Cheryl's group,
No, Misha's group.
and Misha's group, the birthday girls group, you have the bottom 4 bullet points. And here are the questions for both groups. So, read through each of those statements. Which generation are you likely to be in making that statement? All right.
First one's definitely millennials.
You got it, the last 4.
The last,
Yeah. But
it's
definitely.
that's a millennial.
That's a millennial.
Are you giving us the second?
And the second part is which of our 4 images tie to each bullet point. Is it feedback? Is it dress code related? Right? So you have your images that you're going to tie to your bullet point. So which is the likely generation that's making the statement? And then which of our 4 items does it tie to? Is it tied to decision making? Is it tied to communication? Is it tied to dress code? Or is it tied to feedback? And then the last one is, how might a representative from each of those 4 generations respond? So for example, if you believe that the first statement is a millennial, you already know that. But then travel through the other 3 generations. What might a Gen Xer say to that statement? Either to that person, or perhaps behind closed doors. Right?
Right.
What might a baby boomer say, either to that person, right? And that's why I mentioned, think of those family stories. Think of family and friends, right? What do they think about people that make those statements? And then which generation are they from? Or lastly, what might a baby boomer say to a person that's making that statement? Maybe they say it to them, maybe they don't. Maybe they share it in frustration behind closed doors, right? What questions might you have for your group about the 3 tasks for your 4 bullet points?
So many
Can you go over them again?
Sure. So, which generation is likely making the statement, or most likely to make the statement? Then you should have some conversation with your group about why. So if you think it's a millennial, you should be able to articulate why you believe it's a millennial. If you believe it's baby boomer, you should be able to articulate why you think it's a baby boomer that's making the statement, right? Mm-hmm. And then which of our 4 chapters ties into it? Is it dress code related? Is it feedback related? Is it communication related? Or is it decision making related? And you have your 4 reference guides. And then how might a person from a different generation of the one making that statement respond? So if it's a millennial that makes a statement, what might a Gen Xer say, a baby boomer say, or a traditional say? So think about, what might your grandparents say? What might you say? What might your kids say? What might your cousins say of different generations, right? Because you got to be thinking, and just to recap, you got to be thinking about, keep in mind, if your grandparent lived through the Great Depression, they're going to have some very different things to say about bullet point number 2, right?
Oh, yeah.
Okay? Or if they lived through the Civil Rights Movement. Or if they remember when Walt Disney released Snow White in the 1930s. Or if they remember 9/11. So be thinking about all the stuff that we've been doing leading up to this point. We talked a lot about the why, so here's your chance to really apply why you think it's that generation saying it, why you think that generation might respond in a different way, and how it matters in the workplace in terms of dress code, feedback, decision making, or communication. Is it just communication style? And not only the workplace, but your families too. Everybody in a decent spot?
We're good.
This is application time. We get to apply a lot of our learning here. All right, so we will go ahead and take 10 minutes, and then we will come back together as a whole group. Be nice to each other, especially people of different generations.
Okay. Thank you.
you think it's?
Yeah, I don't expect to be at the same organization for the rest of my career.
Do you think it's that more than the other?
Yeah, I think two is Gen X.
Give me a millennial or a Gen X.
Well, well, they have to
Could
be
be a millennial or a Gen
That is
X.
a
Yeah, that's kinda where I
transition.
was
It's
at.
traditional. It's like our parents and our grandparents.
Yeah. Yeah, the last one is a baby.
But the expectation.
No, I disagree.
Oh.
Baby boomers stay for work business. To me, it would be a Gen X, because that's rainbow and unicorns and lollipops.
Oh, yeah, that's right, it is.
And that very family oriented.
Yeah, I think so too.
Because it's a different, it's just a time, and family's very
And if
important,
nothing
and friends
else,
were
I think
very,
the idea of
Yeah.
keeping all the
very
options
important.
open.
Balance.
Yeah.
Balance.
Whereas in a
So
traditionalist
now,
way of
now we
saying,
have to pick what
my
these
dad
are.
is a minor, so I would be a minor.
Well, I don't think
Same
any
with the
dress
baby
code.
I mean,
Yeah,
Pretty
yeah.
much, you got a job and you stayed with it your life.
Yeah, yeah. Why would you walk away from gym?
What was,
Right.
everyone was decision making.
Decision making and communication skills.
That was a big key.
The first thing,
And nobody gets pensions.
the first one. Did you say that we do the top four or the bottom?
Top.
Top.
Okay. So millennials?
No, it's not communication, it would be
I think it's.
feedback.
But I think part of the answer then,
Well,
what
it
that
just making a
tradition
decision,
says,
no?
don't
There's
do this.
deciding to check your email and stuff.
Right.
Stability,
So would you think
whatever.
it's decision
Right,
making?
exactly. And if they're being critical, they might say,
Millennials, the
kids these
first
days
one.
don't have any stick to it.
Yeah, yeah.
Exactly.
Drive to,
Right,
Yeah.
you know, or loyalty.
exactly.
But-
Well, companies don't have any loyalty anymore either, so, you know, they're working, that's a
That
two-way
would be
street.
communication,
Right,
because you're
yeah.
talking about.
Because years ago,
email and stuff, that's how millennials
Yeah.
communicate.
Right, exactly.
And I went in knowing that this and this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You don't.
Mhm. Yeah. The Gen Xer though, I think, I'll go where I get. Mm-hmm.
Well, most money, or I can make the biggest impact.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Same with the millennials. They're not afraid of that.
Right. I'm on 2 years here.
Oh, yeah. And it may not just be career at this organization, but career.
Right.
They may do this, and then they're gonna do that, and then they're gonna do this.
An
and-
entirely different field.
Yeah.
Unless something comes in that structures them to be different,
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
you know, because like my son, who worked for a company for 11 years, went out of business due to the GM strike. He's starting over.
Different field?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe go to the next one.
Yes.
What year did they do this one?
All right, the next one? Yeah.
Decision.
Can't take
Yeah.
For the first one.
seriously at work.
That would be the traditionalists and the baby boomers.
Or the hiring
I agree.
communication.
Yeah.
My niece came up to me the other day and says, Mama, how do you like my husband? I just kind of looked at her and went, I don't. You asked my opinion, you
Yeah,
know?
but it doesn't affect the brain, so, you know.
I
And
don't
yet
think
the
any of these dress
millennials and
codes.
the Gen Xers,
No, I don't need.
you know, look at it as an expression of themselves. So,
Yeah,
Decision
exactly.
making.
But you know what?
That would be
Right,
dress code.
communication.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like you said.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, I think one could be that. Two could be communication. Or decision making.
and I think they would, if they're being critical of some person within the room, they might say, It's unprofessional.
decided.
Mhm.
But I don't have to work 8 hours, I get my work done in 6.
for the second one.
Yeah.
Or even ask the question, have you seen a doctor or something like that, where they would
Mm-hmm.
put it in a peer, or maybe an authority figure.
Right.
I'm inclined to say though that maybe almost everything is cultural.
Now, David.
And all that stuff.
And what about it?
They may have done the hearing, but they're not doing those.
No, not doing that. You're so,
Oh, being
we're
critical,
very
yeah.
accepting of everything because of what we've done.
I think we've learned to be because with our children, we make different
Or is the
choices,
decision
actually,
making-
but it's your child.
Yeah.
My mother's still a Woodstock, but you know,
Yeah.
she's a traditionalist.
All right, next one. Technology is overrated, it's face-to-face communication. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
That is the greatest.
I need an apple today.
That would definitely be a tradition.
No, I think it's traditional.
No, it's okay.
But the third one?
She stopped at communications and said, finish the sentence.
That would
That's
definitely
gonna
be
be a boomer.
traditional.
Oh, yeah? I was gonna say boomer.
Boomers have had to accept.
Yeah, I think that goes for traditional stuff. Boomers would say something like that.
Yeah.
It's not more face-to-face thing.
Yeah.
They come in wanting to change everything.
Yeah.
How would you rather be technology?
So,
Well, what about the last one?
Face-to-face.
I said it was Generation X, but where would it fall?
It's ruining the children. Yeah, it destroys their attention span. It's ruining their physical health and their mental health, like, I'm against
Just
it.
because of the
And,
time,
like,
what was going on in the
I feel like
world.
once you're an adult, you should be able to have technology, but when you're a kid, you should not have any
Plus
technology.
petitioners,
I think
like,
it ruins a
which
lot
would
of
be
the
like my
social
parents and grandparents, they worked. I mean, that's all they did from
You
sun
don't
up
care
to
about your
sun,
health,
you know,
don't care about your
7
mental stability.
you know?
You have no attention span.
Yeah.
You
You
can't
know?
sit still, you lose, like, it just hurts, there's no positive anything with technology when you're a child. Like, you don't need it whatsoever, you should be getting dirty, you should be going outside, you should be, you know, cooking, learning, hands-on. Like, there's no reason for it.
Yeah, but at some point you have to be able to learn that technology. You can't just walk into the workplace and all of a sudden have all this technology thrown at you and
so
be
this would
expected
be
to
either
use it.
traditional or.
No, maybe personal technology.
Yeah, but it's just like,
Yeah.
I mean, we all had technology
No.
thrown at us. And
That's Generation X.
but I'm just
The
saying,
third
like,
one
I
is
still get it thrown
traditional.
at me, so you know.
Yeah, that's exactly.
Gen-
We get it thrown
Gen
at us,
X.
like it's constantly changing. So
Right.
even if they learn it now, it's gonna be different when they get into it in the, you know, work area. But it should be like very, 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 very limited. Like I don't think it should be all digital.
No, I think.
No, I agree.
Their life should be all digital.
Okay, next question. Oh,
There's
no.
not a big,
Well, it's
not
that
a
was
big difference
communication.
except
Yeah.
Gen
I
X's
think so.
lived through a happy, family-oriented
Just
time
because of us
where there wasn't much war touching
I
here.
agree.
You know, where the millennials got smack dab and they grew up with the chaos in the war.
No.
Yeah, and it's immediate response.
Oh,
And I think he works longer hours than I do now.
But the other, X, the fourth one.
I'm
I
guessing
think that's
that,
definitely millennial.
I would say, and the experts.
Yeah, I would too.
Yeah,
I
because.
really think it's Generation X.
I think millennials work more than,
But they work to get the job
So
done.
what the
They
other,
don't
right,
work to
right.
I feel like millennials work all day and all night, and traditionalists and boomers would just do the 9 to 5 and be like, I work my day.
Everything is worth working late for.
Yeah.
Is what
That's right.
my dad as a traditionalist would say. Because growing up, he worked 7 days a week. And he was never around.
You made a commitment.
And that was that. You didn't quit, you didn't complain, you were there. It's like, suck it up.
I think they were.
Yep.
Complaining about it. You got a job.
Unless you had a time card.
Yeah, right.
Well, it's the same, I,
You don't have a time card?
because of the way they
end up working a lot more hours than
Yeah.
you know, it's like-
Yeah.
Given that
Yeah.
today is Misha's birthday, she gets to
You're
decide
getting
who
paid
gets
for
to
it.
report out from your group on each bullet point.
No, we already voted.
That's between you and the birthday girl.
Yeah, she's a facilitator all the way around.
It is, yes.
That's
She
her-
can also appoint. She can also appoint. Do you need more time? Okay, one more minute.
More than the extras?
So,
More than the extras?
They're aware.
You get to choose somebody from your group to report out on each bullet point. She gets to choose.
I'm a big chooser too.
You work because you have a job. and
You get to
that's what
appoint.
you're supposed to do.
All right, you want a few more minutes? All right.
So that is.
I think it is communication, that's what I think, because that's, to them, that's how they communicate.
So checking the phone.
Feedback.
That the boomer may not say to the
That
citizen.
it was disrespectful and very rude.
Yeah,
You
that-
do not.
that was really-
Whether it applies to you, you pay attention to what's going on, you might still learn something.
That's right. So.
They would just do it and hate it.
Yeah.
So which one are you saying it is, Steve?
I think it's feedback.
How many hours you recommend?
Because there isn't a.
That's a decision.
Right.
Or tradition.
And which group do we think it belongs to?
That's how many hours.
Just because a lot of these groups are numbers doesn't mean we place that from your saying. And.
You were
And the
supposed.
extras.
Yeah,
Right? Your work is never done. Your work is never done.
that's right.
Yeah, I would agree with some of that.
It's like the mirror in the wall, you are your mother after all.
That's right. That's right.
It really is when you get to a certain point where you say the same things that you swore you would never say. I mean, even a couple of generations, you go back even as far as your grandmother channeling to your kids. I mean, it's all going through.
Do you see yourself in your kids?
We'll do
Only one?
Okay.
I can see a blend. Each one has a different, you know, each one has a different characteristic. But see, but mine are tainted. I was a single parent for so long, so.
Okay, go ahead and take 20 seconds to wrap up your existing conversation, then we're going to come back together as a whole group.
Jan being the teacher going to
All right. Given that today is Misha's birthday, we're going to have her group go first. It might be possible that her group actually nominated her to report out on all four. So what a birthday gift.
Okay,
So Misha, we'll turn it over to you.
so the first one was, if a section of the meeting doesn't apply to you, then there's nothing wrong with checking your email on your phone. So that group is the millennials. Oh, yeah. And we thought that it would be under the sticking point of communication.
Yeah.
Outspending that he has, it looking in a baby boomer's perspective, I think we thought baby boomers would think that was utterly disrespectful. You know, they shouldn't be doing that as, professional disrespect from a baby boomer's point of view. So the second one is, it's not about how many hours you work as long as you get your work done. That's me. I'm a Gen X. I'm trying to do as much as I can in a short amount of time. I think that's decision making as far as Gen X is concerned. I think you make a decision to do that, you know, so other things are more important. I mean, you know, it's important, but
Sure.
other things are more important than that. And we looked at that from a traditionalist mindset, and we've come to the agreement that a traditionalist thinks that work is never done. You know, that's the first and utmost thing that you have to do is finish what you start and, you know, move forward from there. The next one is people should be in their organizations at least 6 months to a year before they start trying to change things. We think that's a traditionalist. Right?
Mm-hmm.
We said that was decision making as well. We looked at who do we use? Did we use a Gen Xer? Did we answer that?
No, I don't think we answered
I
that.
don't think we answered that part of the question for that one.
That's okay.
Okay, so later.
No worries.
The next one is there are very few work emergencies worth working late for. Again, Gen X, that's me. We thought that was a decision making sticking point as well. A traditionalist we thought would be the exact opposite. You know, they work. That's all they do. Work. My dad's a traditionalist. That's the other, you know, that's first and foremost. Everything else is second. You get work done and then you do everything else.
Nicely done. Does anybody else from the group want to add anything?
I think she did a great job.
Does anybody from this group wish to challenge any?
You can't challenge the birthday girl.
You can.
No.
This is your opportunity. Nicely done. Good conversation, too. All right, Nicole, your group. Who had the first goal? Nicole has one.
The decision was not changed. Christine is going first.
I have the first one, which is I don't expect to be at the same organization for the rest of my career. And we believe that's something that millennials and Gen Xers would say. And from the point of view of the traditionalist or baby boomer might come from, and we thought that part of their criticism of the person saying that would be that they lack loyalty or they don't have that stick-to-itiveness. And we thought that fell into the decision-making.
You can't take people with nose rings seriously at work. And we kind of thought that would be the traditionalists and the baby boomers. It goes toward dress code. And even if they didn't tell you they didn't like it, you can kind of tell by their face. You know, that, because they kind of look extra strange.
Non-verbal.
It's fine.
Very good.
Technology is overrated. It's face-to-face communication. It has the greatest impact. And that would have been more likely baby boomers and, of course, traditionalists would want the face-to-face as well, and Nicole likes face-to-face. But millennials would be the most likely to want to communicate through technology. Nicole was giving us some really good pointers as to why kids should not use technology and how face-to-face is important and how they need to grow up and learn to use, learn to do things without technology first.
The whole way. Lay in the mud.
Play in the mud.
The natural, human way.
Oh, and that would be communication. That's the key point would be communication.
The fourth one is just because the boss works long hours doesn't mean we employees have to. We thought this was the Xers and the Mills, and we put it in the category of feedback. Not all of these seem to fit clearly into some of those sections, but and the response that we we thought of is, like, maybe the traditionalists would say that there is that lack of loyalty, like Dr. Hofer had mentioned in hers, or that maybe the boomer would agree but wouldn't do anything about it, would just suffer through it and hate it, but not going to challenge that. Kind of a side note, I'm noticing more and more as we've gone through this, the similarities between the first two categories, meaning the traditionalists and the baby boomers, and then the mills and the Xers, how much closer they are to each other. If you had to almost make it into two categories, I would make that break at boomer X. So.
That's good. Do we have one more?
Do we?
That was all of them, right?
That's
That's all. Is there anything additional that anybody from your group would like to add?
Yeah, we better not be challenged.
What challenges might the other group have for this group?
That was so close.
So now to come full circle, is there anyone who has a holiday story of an observation or interaction with different generations that made you think of the book study? Misha.
So, I have a bunch of millennials in my house.
Yes.
And my knee was out, so my husband has tried to go shopping and didn't work with food and stuff. So I was like, okay, everybody grab a phone. You call Costco, you call Walmart, you call. So I'm looking for a scooter, because everybody does not have them at the ready. And I tell them to call. I said, call to speak to someone. They're all like, okay, so Costco has them. I'm like, which Costco? And they're like, like, did you call and say, did you? And no, it's right here. It says that they have. I said, but some of them or all of them may be out of order. We don't know. But they spent an hour on the computer instead of taking 2 seconds to call. And I'm like, what? I guess we won't eat today because now it's 9. I'm going to school. It's 9. I'm like, what do you mean call? Pick up the phone, dial the number, call. So they have phones. They never talk to anybody. They text and they chat. They find information. And I'm like,
That is
Because
good.
there's DoorDash.
But yes, it is.
That's good.
I was so
Misha,
mad.
I have seen my son and right at this point, new wife, sit on the couch next to each other and text.
My kids do that all the time.
Rather
They're
than
sitting right next to
It's
each
like,
other.
you're driving me crazy,
Yeah.
But it is useful if you have 2 floors. I will first text my child on the second floor. If she doesn't respond to text, then I call her. And I let the phone ring and ring until she picks it up. She goes, well, why didn't you just call up the stairs? I said, because you wouldn't respond.
I've done that also.
So I text her and then I call. I do not yell up the stairs anymore because it's not getting me anywhere except more stressed.
So now if you think about each of our anecdotal stories, we could easily plug those in right here.
Oh, yeah.
And then be able to identify whether it's communication or feedback.
Well, I think I had Christmas dinner at my house. And I had all 4 of them, and 5. But I couldn't believe it. And they could be, my cousin was sitting here, and
Doesn't it make you wonder if they're talking about you?
I'm saying to myself, okay, what are you guys, and they could have just spoke to each other, but they didn't. And then I had the kids, and they were like out of their mind. Well, I don't allow anybody to smoke in my house, so they had to go on my breezeway. And they're texting, I'm going for a cigarette, you want to come?
Yeah, they just know when I stand up, that's where I'm headed.
Those are wonderful stories, wonderful stories. Well, I hope everyone enjoyed this evening's activity. You have one more?
Going back to the flip-flops.
Yes.
Okay, I work in a building that does not have primary customer contact. So the range of outfits that are worn is unbelievable. They wear flip-flops to work, and all you hear all day is clack, 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 clack. I always wear my regular work shoes that have zippers that go up, they don't flip-flop off the back, and when I walk into somebody's cube, they haven't heard me coming, so when I start talking to them, they jump on me and they're calling me a ninja.
Oh, that's hysterical. You know, and I think with that recent story there, you know, the author even talks about this too, that, you know, if we really enjoy the whys behind everything, then you can really come to enjoy it and you can find the humor in it. And certainly he also talks about how it's through all of the generations combined that organizations reach their peak performance, because you have all those different perspectives and all those different life circumstances, and finding the humor in it. And so having those be points that bring us together rather than separate us.
I do have a pair of sandals that I wear to work in the summer, but they have the elastic strap in the back, so they don't clip.
So they don't clip on. Well, thanks everybody for your participation this evening and for celebrating Misha's birthday. With that, Madam President, this concludes our closed session.
Okay, and with that, this adjourns our meeting. What time is it, Mr. Baker?
28.